The sun hovered low over the horizon, painting the dusty streets of Cedar Hollow in shades of copper and gold. The air shimmered with heat and the scent of dry earth, carried by a wind that rattled shutters and made tumbleweeds chase one another across the main street. A lone rider appeared at the edge of town, dust trailing behind him like smoke from a dying fire. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face carved by years under sun and wind. Each step of his horse echoed against the wooden sidewalks, a steady drumbeat of arrival and warning. The townsfolk paused mid-task, sweeping porches, stacking barrels, or hauling water, casting wary eyes toward the stranger. Whispers followed him like a shadow. The cowboy, they muttered, a man who spoke little, rode hard, and carried a weight that no words had lightened. He did not flinch at the stares. His dark eyes, framed by wind-tangled hair and the edges of a weather hat, scanned the town with a quiet alertness, noting every figure, every creak of a door, every glance that lingered too long. A commotion at the edge of town drew his gaze. A small crowd had gathered near the trading post. A woman stood at the center, hands planted on her hips, her voice sharp and commanding despite the distance. Around her, townsfolk murmured, faces tense with curiosity and unease. The cowboy's horse snorted nervously. He tightened his grip on the reins, feeling the pulse of trouble thrumming in the air. As he approached, he could see the woman more clearly. Dark hair braided with leather strands, clothes adorned with beads that shimmered faintly even in the dust-smeared sunlight. She radiated authority, every movement precise and deliberate. The air between them seemed to hum. The cowboy dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the dry earth, eyes never leaving hers. In that moment, the world shrank to the space between them, the dust swirling at their feet, the tension hanging thick as smoke. The woman's voice cut through the hum of whispers. "That boy belongs to my people," she declared, her gaze fixed on a small figure crouched behind her skirts, a child no older than 8, eyes wide with fear and wonder. The cowboy froze, heart tightening in a strange, almost instinctual recognition. There was something familiar about the boy's eyes, a spark, a reflection that pricked at a memory buried deep beneath years of loss and solitude. He said nothing. Words would have betrayed him. Instead, he let his gaze linger, studying the child while the wind whispered through the streets and the sun dipped lower, gilding every surface with a burning amber light. The tension was tangible, like a wire stretched too tightly. The townsfolk shuffled uneasily, but none dared interrupt. Only the dust danced freely, spiraling between the cowboy and the woman, as though carrying the weight of what was about to unfold. The boy, oblivious of the silent battle wills around him, clutched a small piece of cloth, rocking slightly back and forth, his wide eyes darting between the two adults. In those eyes, the cowboy saw a future he thought long buried. The woman did not flinch as the cowboy stepped closer. "I warned you," she said, her tone steady but edged with fire. "You've no right to claim him. He's ours." The cowboy's jaw tightened. His voice, low and measured, cut through the stillness. "I'm not claiming anything. I'm just looking." He let his gaze drift to the boy again. That spark, those eyes, haunted him. They were not just familiar. They were a mirror, a reflection he had believed lost to time. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Looking is enough to get yourself killed." She gestured to the townsfolk, whose uneasy shuffling had grown more pronounced. "You think you can take him? You'll answer to more than me." The cowboy's hand brushed the edge of his holster, not a threat, but a promise. He was no stranger to danger, nor to the cost of stepping wrong. Yet, even as the wind tugged at his coat and the sun sank lower, he felt the world narrowing to this moment, to the boy, to the choices that might define what remained of him. The boy stirred, small hands gripping the woman's skirt. His eyes met the cowboy's for the first time, and the world seemed to stop. Recognition, though innocent and unexplained, sparked between them. The cowboy's chest constricted. Memories of a life he had nearly forgotten pressed against the edges of his mind. Late nights by campfires, the laughter of a child, a name he could barely speak without trembling. A sudden noise shattered the fragile tension. The rattle of a wagon wheel in the street, a shout from behind a nearby building. Both the cowboy and the woman pivoted instinctively. From the alleyway emerged 2 men, armed and grim-faced, eyes darting between the cowboy and the crowd. Their presence was a threat, immediate and tangible, but it forced the two unlikely allies to align, even if only for survival. Without a word, the cowboy moved forward, his stand protective, his eyes never leaving the boy. The woman's posture shifted, subtle but significant, a silent acknowledgement that danger could not be ignored. The air trembled with tension, gunmetal and sweat mingling, as the two prepared for what could come next. Shots rang out before any words could be exchanged. The first bullet ricocheted off a barrel, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The boy screamed and ducked, and the cowboy's horse whinnied in alarm. In an instant, the cowboy moved, shielding the boy with his own body, his pulse hammering in his ears. The woman dropped to one knee, drawing a knife from her belt with swift precision, defending both herself and the child. The chaos was brief but intense. Dust and smoke filled the air, obscuring the edges of the world, leaving only movement and survival. The armed men hesitated, caught off guard by the ferocity of their resistance, and the cowboy seized a moment. With calculated strength, he drove them back, his boots scuffing the dirt, hands gripping reins and weapon alike. When the final echoes faded, silence fell heavier than before. The townsfolk breathed collectively, their curiosity replaced by awe and fear. The woman rose, breathing hard, her eyes meeting the cowboy's in a long, searching gaze. Who are you?" she demanded, voice low, yet carrying a new respect. The cowboy, brushing dust from his coat, finally spoke, his voice raw with a mix of caution and something more vulnerable. "I'm just a man who knows when a child needs protection." His eyes slid to the boy again, lingering longer than necessary. That spark, the uncanny reflection of himself, was undeniable now. The child's wide eyes held questions and fear, but also trust, faint but unmistakable. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt tethered to something he thought irretrievably lost. The woman, seeing his gaze, stiffened and then softened slightly, caught between suspicion and the recognition of his courage. The boy peeked out once more, small hands reaching unconsciously for the cowboy's coat. And in that fleeting, trembling moment, the three became bound by a force neither could ignore. The boy, a link to the cowboy's past, and perhaps his future in the woman, the guardian who would challenge every instinct he had about family, loyalty, and love. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Cedar Hollow. The wind carried with the scent of dust and fire, and the night promised no peace. Only more trials, more danger, and choices that could change lives forever. The cowboy knew it. And yet, for the first time, he also knew something more. He could not look away. The night had fallen, thick and silent. Only the whisper of wind through the sagebrush and the faint crunch of hooves marking their path. The cowboy led the way. The boy tucked safely in the folds of a worn blanket across his saddle, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. The tribal woman rode close, scanning the shadows with hawk-like precision, her hands never far from her knife or the reins. Somewhere beyond the hills, the sound pursuit lingered, a low, insistent hum of danger. Every step along the rough trail tested them. Rocks and roots tore at horse hooves, low-hanging branches whipped at faces and shoulders, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and pine. The boy shivered, not entirely from cold, but from the weight of uncertainty pressing against his small chest. The cowboy stole glances at him, his heart tightening with every fearful blink. He had ridden many miles in his life, faced men who would kill for a bag of coins or a fleeting grudge, but never had he felt the protective intensity he did now. This child, small and fragile, carried more than just a weight of survival. He carried the echoes of a past the cowboy had long thought gone. The tribal woman's voice cut through the quiet. "You think the world will just let us pass?" she asked, tone sharp as a drawn blade. "There are men out there who would kill for him, for me, for both of us. You need to ride with eyes wide open." The cowboy nodded without speaking, letting the words settle into the night air. He had faced countless dangers, yet the path ahead felt uncertain, tangled not just with physical threats, but with the delicate balance of trust. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmuring fragments of dreams, and the cowboy felt a pang of longing he could barely name. He remembered his own son, long gone, taken before he could even hold him. The reflection of those memories in the boy's eyes was impossible to ignore. Hours passed, measured only by the slow trek of the moon across the sky. The wilderness was no gentle guardian. Every rustle, every snap of a branch, every hoot of an owl carried potential peril. They navigated treacherous terrain, descending into narrow valleys where water ran sluggishly between jagged rocks, then climbing ridges that seemed to scrape the sky. At one point, a sudden movement, a flash of steel from a distant ridge, made the woman draw her knife instinctively, only for it to be a shadow of a deer startled into flight. Despite the threat, a quiet bond began to form. The cowboy would offer the boy a reassuring smile, or a soft word as he adjusted the blanket around him. The woman's steely gaze softened in fleeting moments, watching how he moved with the boy, how he treated danger not as a chance to boast, but as a responsibility to protect. By the time dawn painted the horizon in streaks of purple and amber, exhaustion hung heavy, but so did a fragile, growing trust. Morning came in a burst of gold and rose. The wilderness revealed itself with deceptive beauty. A wide, rushing river cut across their path, the water churning over hidden rocks with a roar that made the heart pound. The boy pressed close to the cowboy, tiny hands gripping his arm, eyes wide and fearful. The tribal woman studied the river with calculated precision, her mind racing for the safest crossing. The current was treacherous, waves smashing against jagged stones. But there was no alternative. They could not linger. The cowboy surveyed the river, estimating the depth, the strength, and the hidden hazard beneath its frothy surface. "Hold on tight," he said, voice firm but gentle, guiding the boy to secure his small frame across the saddle. The woman mounted behind him, her posture tense, muscles coiled like springs ready for the inevitable. They entered the water cautiously. Horses struggled, hooves slipping on submerged stones, water lapping dangerously high. The boy's grip tightened instinctively, and the cowboy could feel his small body trembling. Every second was a test. One misstep could send them plunging into the river, carried away by the merciless current. The woman's voice called out directions, sharp and precise, a rhythm of trust and urgency guiding their movements. Halfway across, a sharp cry split the air. A branch snapped along the bank, or perhaps the unmistakable sound of pursuit drawing near. The cowboy's heart clenched. He could not risk the boy's life. With a sudden, decisive motion, he guided the horse toward a safer bend in the river, muscles straining, horse legs pounding against the slippery rocks. Water splashed around them in torrents, soaking their clothes, their hair plastered to their faces. But the boy held firm, eyes wide but trusting. Finally, they reached the opposite bank, soaked and exhausted, hearts hammering in unison. The woman dismounted, scanning the tree line with eyes that could pierce shadows. For a moment, the three stood together, panting, alive, bonded by danger and the sheer victory of survival. The boy looked at the cowboy, an unspoken question in his eyes, and the cowboy smiled softly, brushing wet hair from the child's forehead. "We're not done yet," he said quietly, knowing the world beyond the river would bring more trials, but also knowing they were stronger for having faced this first together. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist of early morning. The trio moved cautiously along a narrow ridge overlooking a canyon, the wind tugging at clothing and hair, carrying the faint scent of pine and dry earth. The cowboy rode slightly ahead, eyes constantly scanning for threats, but his attention kept drifting back to the boy. There was something in the child's gaze that demanded recognition, a reflection of a life he thought long gone. The boy, sensing the cowboy's watchfulness, whispered, Are we safe now?" His voice was fragile, tentative, carrying the weight of fear that had followed him for as long as he could remember. The cowboy's heart tightened. "For now," he said softly, "but we keep moving. Danger isn't done with us yet." His voice was calm, but every word carried the unspoken promise of protection. The tribal woman observed quietly, her sharp eyes catching every nuance. The cowboy's protective posture, the tenderness of his tone, the way the boy unconsciously reached for him. Slowly, she began to sense a deeper truth forming, something beyond mere survival. Perhaps this man, rough and solitary though he was, belonged to the boy in ways she could not yet define. Yet, suspicion and tradition held her firmly in place, wary of a bond she could not fully understand. As they descended the ridge, the wind carried an unfamiliar sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that grew steadily closer. The cowboy stiffened, signaling the woman to quiet the boy. From the canyon below, the unmistakable figures of riders appeared, moving fast, intent clear in their posture. Pursuers. Their presence confirmed that the journey ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand every ounce of strategy, speed, and instinct they possessed. The boy looked up, eyes wide, the faintest trace of a smile forming in response to the cowboy's steady reassurance. I'm not afraid," he whispered, though the quaver in his voice betrayed him. The cowboy's heart clenched. He had faced many battles, but none had touched him like this. The weight of another life in his hands, the reflection of his own soul staring back through the boy's eyes. The woman tightened her grip on her reins, scanning the horizon. "They won't give up," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We need to be ready for whatever comes." The cowboy nodded, understanding more than words could convey. The bond they had forged in the darkness, across the river, and along the ridge would be tested again, and the boy's survival, perhaps even their own, would depend on it. For the first time, the cowboy allowed himself to consider the possibility. This child might not just be connected to his past, but to a future he could no longer ignore. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the canyon walls, he felt the weight of destiny pressing against him, shaping choices that would change all their lives. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying dust, the scent of pine, and the promise of trials yet to come. And in that whisper, the cowboy knew one truth with certainty. They were no longer merely fleeing. They were walking a path that could either destroy them or bind them together forever. The wind carried a bitter edge as they crested the final ridge before the clearing, the sun hanging low, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The cowboy's heart pounded, not just from the chase, but from the weight of truth pressing against him. Below, the makeshift camp of the pursuers stretched across the open valley. Armed men, some familiar from the town, others strangers, their presence an undeniable threat. Every instinct screamed caution, yet one force drove him forward, the boy's safety and the unrelenting pull of recognition. The tribal woman rode beside him, tense, her eyes narrowed in vigilance. She had followed him through rivers, ridges, and nights thick with peril. Yet suspicion still clung to her like a second skin. She had seen the way he protected the boy, the careful glances, the gentle gestures. Yet the fire of distrust lingered. She would not yield to sentiment easily. The boy, perched between the cowboy and the woman, looked back at the approaching danger, small hands clutching the edges of the saddle blanket. "Are they going to hurt us?" he whispered. The cowboy's eyes softened, a brief flicker of warmth in the harsh landscape. "Not if we're clever," he murmured, though his mind raced. Every plan had to account for the boy's safety, for the woman's trust, and for the truth he had long suppressed. As the valley widened, the cowboy finally dismounted, signaling the woman to do the same. Dust rose in faint swirls around their boots, the tension in the air nearly palpable. The pursuers halted at the first sign of resistance, uncertainty flickering across their faces as they took in the rugged figures standing before them, united by circumstance and resolve. The cowboy's gaze fell on the boy once more, and with a steady breath, he spoke the words that had haunted him for years. "Look at him," he said, voice low but unwavering. "See his eyes. Do you recognize them?" The woman's eyes followed his hand, tracing the boy's gaze, and then, as though struck by lightning, realization passed over her features. The boy's eyes, the very same deep, stormy green that mirrored the cowboy's own, reflected a truth she had not imagined. A gasp escaped her lips, the first sound she had made beyond commands and warnings. It can't be," she whispered, disbelief laced with awe. "Yes," the cowboy said softly, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "He is mine. I thought I had lost this part of my life forever, but it seems fate had other plans." The boy blinked, confusion and recognition mingling, and then, with a hesitant step, reached for the cowboy's hand. The cowboy felt a warmth that had been absent for years, a tether pulling him back to a past he thought irretrievably gone. Suspicion remained in the woman's posture, but it softened, tempered by the courage and conviction she had witnessed over countless miles. She had seen him shield the boy from rivers, cliffs, and pursuing enemies. She had seen him face danger without hesitation. Slowly, a gesture of acceptance emerged. She lowered her weapon, her eyes lingering on the bond forming before her. Yet the world outside the clearing would not wait for revelation. From the ridge behind them, a sudden movement drew the cowboys' attention. Pursuers attempting to flank their position, their intent unmistakable. The cowboys' jaw tightened. Words were no longer enough. They would have to fight for the truth, for the boy, and for the fragile alliance that had carried them this far. "Get ready," he whispered to the woman, voice low, controlled. "We hold them here. We don't let them touch him." The woman nodded, eyes hardening. Her knife gleamed faintly in the dying sunlight, a silent promise of defense. The boy, still small and fragile, sensed the gravity of the moment but did not falter, trusting the two who protected him through the wilderness. The cowboy felt a surge of responsibility and determination unlike anything before. This was not just survival. It was vindication, connection, and the chance to reclaim what he had lost. Gunfire erupted without warning. Dust and smoke mingled with the acrid scent of gunpowder. The pursuers pressed forward, desperate and relentless, but the cowboy and the woman were ready. Every movement was precise, a dance of survival honed through countless trials. The cowboy's hand moved with deadly accuracy, yet every gesture was tempered by a singular focus. The boy remained unharmed. The woman's blade flashed in the sunlight, intercepting threats with skill and lethal intent. The valley echoed with shouts, the metallic ring of gunfire, the cries of fear, and the occasional bark of orders from the attackers. The cowboy moved fluidly, ducking behind a fallen tree, pulling the boy close, eyes scanning, calculating. His heart hammered in rhythm with each shot fired and each peril avoided. In the chaos, trust was forged anew. The boy's life, the woman's respect, and his own redemption bound tightly together in a crucible of danger. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into moments, the last of pursuers fell back, realizing the futility of their attack. Silence returned, heavy and thick, broken only by the ragged breaths of those who had survived. The cowboy slowly lowered his weapon, scanning for any lingering threat. The woman's eyes softened, no longer sharp with suspicion, but tempered by understanding. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide, awe and relief mingling. "You saved me," he whispered. The cowboy knelt, lifting the child into his arms. "No," he said gently. "We saved each other." For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel whole, the bond between father and son undeniable, unshakable, and true. The dust settled slowly over the valley, drifting on a warm, fading wind. The sun dipped toward the horizon, bathing the landscape in gold and crimson streaks, casting long shadows across the terrain. The cowboy stood, holding the boy close, feeling the small body pressed against his chest. The tribal woman approached, her steps cautious but deliberate. She stopped a short distance away, her eyes meeting his. "You've proven yourself," she said quietly, almost a whisper. "Not just in battle, but in heart." Her voice carried respect, but also a subtle warmth, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been forged through danger and trust. The cowboy inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement, letting the bond speak louder than words could. The boy looked up, his eyes reflecting both exhaustion and the first flickers of hope he had known in weeks. "Will we stay together?" he asked softly, clutching the cowboy's coat. The cowboy smiled, a rare, genuine curve of lips that had been absent for too long. "We'll face whatever comes together," he said. "No more running, no more hiding. We make our own path now." The tribal woman studied the boy, then the cowboy, and for the first time allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "He is safe," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "For now, and maybe for always." They moved toward the remnants of the camp, tending to minor injuries, securing supplies, and preparing for the long journey home, or wherever their destiny would take them. The boy laughed softly for the first time, the sound carrying across the valley, fragile but full of promise. The cowboy felt a weight lift from his chest, a clarity of purpose that had eluded him for years. The wilderness had tested them, but had also revealed truth, courage, and the power of connection. As night fell, the trio made camp near a small copse of trees, the fire crackling and throwing flickering light across their tired faces. The cowboy tended the flames, the boy sitting close, eyes heavy with sleep, but mind still alert. The tribal woman watched from a short distance, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight, ever vigilant, yet relaxed in a way she had not been at the journey's start. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice carrying into the quiet night. "The frontier isn't just a place," he said softly. "It's a test of courage, of loyalty, of heart." He glanced down at the boy, then at the woman, and continued. "We've passed some of that test. But more waits. Always more." The boy yawned, resting his head against the cowboy's shoulder, and the cowboy felt the small hand curl around his finger. The warmth of life, the pulse of trust and love, surged through him, anchoring him in a way he had never known. The tribal woman, watching, allowed herself a rare sigh of relief. In that moment, the harsh world around them seemed, if only briefly, manageable. The night deepened, stars blinking into existence, the vast wilderness stretching in every direction. Yet despite its enormity, its dangers, its uncertainties, there was a sense of peace, a fragile, hard-won peace, anchored by their bond. The cowboy reflected on all that had led him to this point, loss, solitude, and the relentless pull of fate. Now, in the eyes of the boy, he saw not just a reflection of himself, but a future worth fighting for. As the firelight danced across the valley, the cowboy spoke again, softly, almost to the stars themselves. "Sometimes the world tests you. Sometimes it takes from you. But sometimes it gives back more than you could imagine." The boy stirred in his sleep. The tribal woman's gaze softened, and for the first time in years, the cowboy allowed himself to hope. The frontier would continue to challenge them, to demand courage and resilience, but they were no longer alone. They had each other. And in that knowledge, in that fragile, hard-won connection, lay the strength to face whatever came next.